But for our last speaker, we have Betty Mekdeci, and she is the Executive Director of the Birth Defect Research for Children. And she will be discussing today the National Birth Defect Registry, a novel approach to identify birth defects in the Vietnam veterans' children.
Before we start the video, I'd like to thank Jill and the committee for inviting me to make a presentation about our research data project, the National Birth Defect Registry. The registry was started in 1990 and is based on the concept of the alert practitioner. And what that means is that doctors started seeing increases in normally rare birth defects in their patient population and began to do a retrospective analysis of what these cases might have in common. And this is how the effects of thalidomide, DES, Dilantin, mercury, alcohol, radiation, and other teratogens were first identified. You can't make a hypothesis without an observation, and this is what our registry can do: identify potential links between birth defects and similar exposures. To introduce you to the registry, I'd like to share this short video.
Babies are born with major birth defects, and even when babies seem okay at birth, they may have problems as they grow older. Every family asks, why? Why did this happen to my child? This is why Birth Defect
And then just turn up the volume a little bit.
created the National Birth Defect Registry, a research project designed by 7 scientists to look for the causes of birth defects. The registry is online, so you can enter your child's case anytime, night or day. Data from the registry is analyzed to find patterns of birth defects associated with similar exposures, like missing limbs in children whose mothers took a morning sickness medication, and cleft palates in a Tennessee community where solvents leaked into the water supply, or birth defects in the children of veterans who were exposed to chemicals in the Vietnam or Gulf Wars. Data from the registry has also uncovered important clues to autistic spectrum disorders. Registry data has been used for studies presented to government agencies and in national media forums. The Director of Research and Development for the EPA wrote, "Your birth defects registry is the type of effort needed to make linkage between environmental exposures and birth defects." Visit the National Birth Defect Registry at www.birthdefects.org. This video was supported by a grant from the American Legion Child Welfare Foundation.
One of the first issues that we were asked to work on using registry data was to evaluate birth defects in the children of Vietnam veterans. We collaborated with the New Jersey Agent Orange Commission to develop a special section to collect data on areas of service and ways of potential Agent Orange exposure. You can go to the next slide. The commission also encouraged us to add data on learning, attention, immune, and endocrine problems in the children. I was skeptical about this because in 1990, when we began the registry, no one considered these conditions to have a prenatal origin. Now they are recognized by some as functional birth defects. I'd like to share some of the slides showing the impressive pattern of disabilities we found consistently in the children of Vietnam veterans. Of course, most of you know that Agent Orange was a combination of 2 defoliants, 2,4,5-T, 2,4-D, contaminated by dioxin, and over 19 million gallons of herbicides were sprayed in Vietnam. It's a potent carcinogen, and there's also much evidence that it can also cause reproductive, developmental, and immunological defects. Next slide. One of the things that we have consistently found in the children of Vietnam veterans, ever since we only had 300 cases, now we have over the 2,000, is increases in all types of learning disabilities. Next slide. This goes hand in glove with the attention disorders. Next slide. And emotional and behavioral conditions of all kinds. And these conditions occur in the same case most often. Next slide. We also have had consistent reports of increases in allergies. And once again, the allergic, emotional, behavioral problems, the learning disabilities, the attention disorders, all clustered together. Next slide, please. We find consistent immune response disorders, and this is not unexpected since dioxin does target the immune system. Next slide. We've also found consistent endocrine effects, and I think many of you might be interested in this. The thyroid defects are very impressive. Diabetes, can't read this. I don't know what's underneath it. At any rate, you can see these slides on our website if you want to read all of them, but these have been consistent findings as we've gone from 300 cases to over 2,000. Next slide. Your skin is the window to what's going on in the rest of your body. And it's been interesting that we've always had increases in skin disorders in veterans' children. Next slide. Because the liver is a major detox organ, it's interesting to find liver function disorders, jaundice, and enlarged liver in these children. Next slide. The genital urinary defects, including malformed, I don't know if you can read this, but under this is malformed reproductive organs, very impressive. This is bicornuate uterus, interstitial cystitis, malformed ureters. Next slide. And this is a slide that you could only find in our data, because not only do we collect information on male and female exposures and on functional and structural birth defects, we also collect data ongoing in the children. We're not stopping just at hospital discharge data. So we have conditions in the Vietnam veterans children that include endometriosis, infertility, arthritis, muscle and joint pains. A pattern that is so impressive that when a case comes into the registry, and the registry is online, when the case comes into the registry, we don't even have to look at the Agent Orange exposure data. We can just look at the distribution of disabilities and say, that's a Vietnam veteran's child. Next slide. One of the problems that we've had with our data, and we've presented it by invitation to the National Academy of Science, the NIEHS, the EPA Subcommittee on Endocrine Disruptors, congressional committees, the VA, and in media forums. One of the problems we've had is that we didn't have anything that really explained how this could be happening. But in recent years, we have found studies, and particularly this study that was in 2017, that demonstrate that dioxins can induce the transmission of environmental conditions to the next generation via germline exposures. Increased incidence of birth defects in offspring of male veterans exposed to Agent Orange containing dioxin suggests that dioxins may include epigenomic changes in male germ cells of adults during spermatogenesis. Next slide. Once again, you can't make a hypothesis without an observation, and we can provide the observation. Not only have we done work on Agent Orange, we were also the first organization to find a rare craniofacial birth defect in the children of Gulf War veterans. We found clusters of birth defects in the Tennessee community where trichloroethylene was leaking into the water supply. In our evaluation of our autism data, we found that 60% of our cases also had structural birth defects, presents whole new areas to think of in looking at causation. So with that, I'll end, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Betty?
I have a comment, which is, first of all, Betty, I just want to commend you for being an advocate in this field. That's what I am. I'm a non-scientist advocate concerned about how ancestral exposures impact the health and development of the later generations, the F1s, and also, the F2s. So a quick question for you about this registry. So how do you know that they're veterans, but how do you know what their Agent Orange exposure might be? Because of course, veterans have so many exposures. A lot of them smoked like crazy, a lot of drugs, a lot of pharmaceuticals, other exposures associated with war. How do you try to ascertain that?
Well, first of all, we do ask about all those other things. We ask about the father's medication exposure, smoking history, alcohol history. We even have a profile of the health history in the year prior to the birth of the child, because there's a specific health history that more or less indicates there may have been a chemical exposure. So we look at that. We're always improving the registry. We just reprogrammed the entire registry to make it cell phone friendly, because 60% of the people entering the registry come in by cell phone. So what we do is, if we're going to do a study, I mean, obviously these are self-reported, self-selected data. But if we're going to do a study, and we have, then we are going to get, medical records. We're going to get permission from the families. We might do a supplemental questionnaire that the researcher may be interested in, these questions. We did a study, worked on a study with the University of Texas on the Gulf War birth defects, the golden hour syndrome. And our role in that was, we had to get the medical records documenting that the child actually had this. We had to get the IRB consent form signed. We had to do outreach beyond just what we had to all the craniofacial centers to see if we had missed any cases. So this is where we can go from here, because obviously what we do is we raise a hypothesis. From there, you go on, and certainly the animal work that we've seen today, cell culture work, high throughput work, all of this can come back and show that what we're seeing is in fact correct. I think the most interesting thing we did, and I was going to do that today, but I decided to do this, is we looked at 6 exposures that have been associated with birth defects in the published literature. And we wanted to see if our data was finding the same thing. And it was. It's on our website, so anyone who's interested can look at it. So we wanted to show that what we were doing was actually finding what's there. We've also done a study on a rare birth defect, not so rare, called Gastroschisis, which is increasing in reporting systems all over the world. And we did a study with the University of Texas, a young doctor, and we found the same thing in the published literature: young mothers, maternal, recreational drug, or alcohol exposure. So that's how we know that what we're finding has some meaning. It doesn't mean that because we find it, we say, we've got it. That proves that. It means we have a place to start to do other studies, that will support what we're finding. Right now, we have a total of over 6,000 cases in the online registry, and another 4,000 in the booklet form, which was the original registry, which we'll be entering. So we have a pretty nice piece of data to look at all kinds of things, and our programmer has come up with a method where right now I can go into the data and look at the data and see what is increasing. It'll come up in red if it's doubling, and it's lighter red if it's trending toward an increase. And we can look at anything. We can look at aspartame. We can look at CBD. We can look at marijuana. And you'd be surprised at some of the things that we see.
That's that's terrific. And I think that hypothesis hunting is an underrated piece of the scientific puzzle. It's very, very critically important. So big kudos to you for doing it in such a systematic manner. One quick question. So when Dr. Smith-Raska presented in the beginning of the session today, he had his last slide was about study design. He said, one thing you could do is look at families that are highly impacted, and then retrospectively, right, ask the parents, about their exposures. Is there a way to use your data to look at those families that maybe have not just one child with a birth defect or a cognitive defect like autism, but maybe, 2 or 3, like I see these families all the time, right, that have multiple kids with unexplained neurodevelopmental abnormality. And I think that's a brilliant question, a very important thing to look at. Instead of just looking for DNA, ask about the ancestral exposures. Could you use your data to do that sort of study design?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, we are easing collecting data on the grandchildren of Vietnam veterans, because that's been an ongoing question. that the veterans have asked. Now, of course, we've said, well, there are many, many things that can cause birth defects. And that's a separate pregnancy, a separate husband and wife. But we have 300 cases in now, and if we analyze them, they look almost identical to what we're finding in the first generation. So,
yeah.
and
I'm asking
I'm
kind of specifically if there are like multiple children in one generation.
Oh yes, we can do that too. As a matter of fact, in the autism report that we did, we found several families that had more than one child with autism, or they had a child with autism and then another child with another birth defect that wasn't autism. Or they might have twins, So yes, we can look at all of that. That report was on 137 cases, and it's on our website. We presented that to Autism One in Chicago, but I'm hoping to get a lot more data to revisit that to see if what we found the first time we'll find the second time.
Okay, thank you. Tia, back to you.
Yeah, wonderful. I think we have one question. Very interesting. I'm wondering how the public know to participate in the in the registry. Yes, and then how does the registry reach out to such a wide group of participants?
That's a very special question. Mm-hmm. Certainly, the veteran community knows us very well, but we're also listed in at NIE. I've been a co-chair of a committee of NIEHS for many years, and we are in like NIN's database, we're in state databases. Mm-hmm. We had one, when we first started the registry, we had a state send us labels from all the children that had gone through their developmental disability program, which shocked the heck out of me. I thought, where's the HIPAA here? But they come from all over. And then, of course, to have it come in through the internet, search engine optimization is key. I mean, you've got to get out there to people. So, we hope to, if we had 20,000 cases, we'd know so much more than 10,000. Mm-hmm. We know a lot with 2,000, but 20,000 would be pretty nice.
Yeah. So I actually brought it up to my uncle who served in the Gulf War, and he has started to participate in these studies, which is very useful and helpful information as well.
It was interesting because a year after the Gulf War, we started getting mm-hmm. reports from Gulf War veterans, and the scientists on our board were down. And I said, should we design a special section to collect data? And they said, oh yes. So we put together data. There were 31 categories of reproductive toxicants in the Gulf environment. We started finding this rare birth defect that occurs usually 1 in 26,000 cases called Goldenhar syndrome. Skewed way up. So we had a lot of publicity for it, and the Department of Defense was not happy at all. Mm-hmm. So they had a study done at the Naval Training Research Center, and they only looked at half the cases because they could only look at the ones born in military hospitals. We had the ones that were kicked out to civilian, and they found a tripling of just what we found. So they quietly went away. So, we never know what will happen, what will come in our door any one day. The Cleft Palate cluster that we found in Tennessee, we worked on that because the Tennessee Department of Environment referred this grandmother to us who was worried about too many cases of cleft palate. And surely there was an 1,100% increase linked to trichloroethylene. So, it comes, we don't know. We don't know how it gets there, but we'll if the data supports it, we will go mm-hmm. for it. But the data's got to show that there's something going on.
Yeah. Well, with that, Jill, do you have any final comments before we end today's session?
No, I just want to thank the speakers. There was a wide variety of topics, a wide variety of organisms, wide variety of mechanisms. It's a lot to kind of keep in your head. We will post whatever we can of the recordings. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And We'll be back with a marathon session specifically on heritable effects of tobacco and cannabis and related products later in the month. So thank you so much, everybody. And thanks again to our speakers, and thanks to you, Tia, and to our absent co-chair, Patrick Allard.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you
All
so much for
right.
attending today's session.